What's going on guys, I hope you're all well. In today's video I'll be showcasing how well PC games run on an LG CX. I hooked up my gaming laptop featuring an RTX 3080 to the TV and I used an Xbox controller to play since I don't have a wireless mouse and keyboard setup just yet. Before I dive into the gameplay demos, the first thing I did was duplicate the laptop output to the TV. When you connect a laptop or PC to the TV, it won't default to game mode, so swap over to that via the quick picture settings. Next, I mashed the green button on the remote to bring up the FreeSync information panel. This showed a fixed frame rate of 30Hz or frames per second. What you want to do now is go into your picture settings, additional settings, and make sure instant game response is turned on, which it should be. Turn on HDMI Ultra HD Deep Color, although it probably won't make a difference since the HDMI port on the laptop is only HDMI 2.0. Also turn on AMD FreeSync Premium to unlock variable refresh rates for a smoother gaming experience. The first game I spun up was Forza Horizon 4, as it's one of the, if not the best looking racing game out there. I cranked the settings up to maximum via the custom preset and this is what it looks like on the TV. On maximum settings I was consistently close to 60 FPS. If you look at the FPS counter on the top left or right, you can see that it rarely dips below that mark. Since the TV supports 120Hz, I lowered the graphics quality to high just to see if I could hit the 120 FPS mark, and indeed it did. This is the kind of FPS you could expect when you unlock the in-game frame rate. You can see it regularly hitting 140 plus FPS and no tearing in sight thanks to the built-in GSYNC and FreeSync. This is why the LG CX is still one of the best gaming TVs money can buy. With GTA 5 I started on high rather than very high just to see if I could hit the 100 plus FPS mark. I also turned off the more intensive anti-aliasing options to hit the numbers you're seeing in the top left. In the bustling city, the FPS does drop 30 to 40% because there is a lot more going on in terms of population density and traffic. It's still at a respectable frame rate and is buttery smooth, so no complaints there. When we head outside with a bit of action, we're still seeing a very high frame rate. The only time it really drops is when the draw distance is a little greater, and even then the drop isn't massive. Here we have the game running at max settings with just Nvidia TX88 turned off. The gameplay still felt very smooth despite the significant drop in FPS. I think if you're seeing a constant 60 FPS or close to it, you won't have trouble playing. You just don't want to see massive fluctuations in the FPS. At max settings with all of the bells and whistles, the frame rate hovers between 40 and 60 and rarely exceeds that. When we head outside with the greater draw distance in play, the frame rate tanks a little bit, staying between 30 and 45 FPS. I didn't see any drops below 30, so it was still playable. As a side note, I did run into a very bad stuttering issue when I had the laptop screen duplicated. If you pay attention to the laptop at the bottom right, you can see that the gameplay is very smooth. The TV paints a different picture, however, it's stuttering to the point where it's not very playable. The point here is that if you're duplicating your display, you may run into this issue. Having said that, your mileage may vary and it may not be an issue for you. The Witcher 3 has historically been very difficult to run at max settings, even with the latest and greatest GPU. At max settings I was constantly seeing above 50 FPS, and because it's not a first person shooter, the frame rate was more than adequate for a smooth gameplay experience, in my opinion of course. There will be people that disagree that 50 to 60 FPS is ideal even for a third person game, and to that I'd have to say that it's subjective, and if they don't like playing at anything below 100 FPS, they can always lower the graphic settings and resolution. If there are any other PC games you'd like me to test and demo, please do leave a comment below if you're still here. If you're still here, give the video a like as it immeasurably helps a small channel like mine grow. I really do appreciate it. At 4K, I struggle to reach the 3-digit mark even with the settings at the absolute lowest and zero post-processing. At this setting, the frame rate mostly stayed around the 70 to 90 FPS mark and in certain scenarios would exceed 100 FPS. If you look at the frame rate during this fight scene, the FPS is barely dropping below 100, probably because of how plain the backdrop is. If we now look at this combat scene with a bunch of wolves, the frame rate is taking a bit of a hit because of how involved the background is. Now onto the post-apocalyptic world of Metro Exodus. It's a fairly dark game, but even then at max settings my laptop grade RTX 3080 struggles to get much above 40 FPS, even when there isn't a lot going on. This is because the GPU is equivalent to a 3060 Ti or 3070 in terms of performance. It's not the same as a full fat RTX 3080 unfortunately. When there is a bunch going on in terms of action, the frame rate dips closer to 30, but thankfully not any lower. With that considered, it's still very playable, although not ideal. Lowering the graphics a couple of notches to high, with Ultra and Extreme being the two higher presets, we see a 30 to 40% boost in frame rate, with the visuals not really taking that much of a hit. This title is probably not the best for an OLED, as there are a lot of dark scenes and it can sometimes be hard to navigate your way around the tunnels. I haven't calibrated the game mode to help with crushed blacks, but I do plan on doing that at some point. Far Cry 5 is another fairly new title, and again I tested it at the maximum possible settings. Bear with me when it comes to the action, as I am using a controller, so I'm not as accurate as I usually am. During my playthrough for this test, the game ran flawlessly apart from the random bug here and there. Nothing game breaking, which was a relief. At max settings there's quite a bit of vegetation and particle effects with regards to fires and explosions. They don't appear to tank the frame rate all that much, as I consistently saw frame rates between 40 and 70. Rarely going above 65. These daytime shots are with the graphics set to the low preset. The amount of vegetation doesn't seem diminished in any way, and textures still look okay at 4K. Frame rates are hovering above 70, and even on the more demanding scenes I didn't see any jarring drops. Even on low settings at 4K I didn't hit the magic 100 plus FPS mark. The laptop grade RTX 3080 just isn't powerful enough to get Far Cry 5 to those sorts of numbers. Of course, lowering the resolution would get me there, but this video is all about the 4K gameplay. Mafia 1 Definitive Edition is one of those games where you can happily drive around and admire the bustling cityscapes or the beautiful countryside. It really does look incredible. At max settings it does a number on the GPU. The frame rate in the more lively scenes would drop to near the 30 FPS mark on occasion, but not enough to deem the game unplayable, for me at least. With the frame rate sitting at around the 40 to 55 mark, I found the experience very enjoyable, and I wasn't inclined to lower the graphics settings to improve it. Weirdly enough, lowering the graphics settings to the lowest made very little difference to the FPS, at least from my testing. At a rough guess, I'd say the FPS has only improved by a marginal 10%, and it doesn't feel any smoother compared to when the game was maxed out. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, a like would be appreciated. If you're still here, I'm going to guess you enjoyed the video, so why not subscribe? If there's any LGCX related content you want me to produce, please let me know in the comments. I am open to covering any other tech item out there as long as I can afford it, so leave those suggestions too. See you in the next one.